The pen trembled in my hand as my mother shoved the mortgage documents closer across the kitchen table. My signature was already half formed on the cosigner line when the sharp chemical smell hit my nostrils. That same acrid scent that had filled my lungs in my previous life as I lay dying in the hospital, my organs systematically failing from heavy metal poisoning. I dropped the pen. "What's wrong with you?" my mother snapped, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against the table. "Sign it. Your sister needs this house." My sister, Victoria, stood behind her, arms crossed, that familiar smug expression on her face. At 28, she was everything my family valued. Beautiful, married to a doctor, pregnant with their first grandchild. I was 25, plain, single, working 2 jobs to pay off debts I'd accumulated helping this very family. But I knew something they didn't. I'd lived this moment before. In my previous life, I'd signed those papers. I'd co-signed the mortgage for the beautiful 4-bedroom house on Maple Grove Avenue that Victoria just had to have. The house with the sprawling backyard, the granite countertops, the location in the best school district. And 3 years later, I died from cadmium and arsenic poisoning traced back to the contaminated groundwater from the old industrial site that property was built on. Victoria had moved out after 6 months, claiming the house didn't feel right. She'd rented it out to tenants while I'd continued living there, unable to afford to move because my credit was destroyed, and every spare dollar went to the mortgage payments she'd stopped making. "I'm not signing," I said quietly. The room went silent. My father looked up from his newspaper, his reading glasses sliding down his nose. My mother's mouth fell open. "What did you just say?" Victoria's voice was ice. I met her eyes steadily. In my previous life, I'd been so desperate for their approval, so terrified of their disappointment. I'd died alone in a hospital bed while they'd been at Victoria's baby shower, too busy to visit. The doctor had told me the contamination had been slow, insidious, building up in my system for years. By the time symptoms appeared, the damage was irreversible. I said no. I stood up, leaving the unsigned documents on the table. "Find someone else to ruin." My mother's hand shot out and grabbed my wrist, her nails digging in. "You ungrateful little bitch, after everything we've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but 25 years of buried resentment, plus a lifetime of death and rebirth, had given me clarity. "Besides, use me as a personal ATM?" Victoria slammed her hand on the table. "Mom, I told you she'd be like this. She's always been jealous of me." "Jealous?" I almost laughed. "Victoria, I'm trying to save your life." That got their attention. My father actually set down his newspaper. "What are you talking about?" my mother demanded. I could tell them about the contamination, about the industrial waste buried beneath that beautiful property, about the arsenic in the groundwater and the cadmium in the soil. But I knew they wouldn't believe me. In my previous life, I'd tried to tell them once I'd discovered the truth, once the environmental reports had finally come out. They'd called me a liar, trying to weasel out of my responsibilities. "That property has issues," I said carefully. "I've done research. The land used to be—" "Oh, here we go." Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Let me guess. You Googled something, and now you're an expert? The inspector cleared it. The bank approved it. But you know better than professionals?" "The inspector was hired by the seller," I pointed out, and the bank doesn't care about contamination unless it affects resale value." My mother released my wrist and stood up, her face flushed with anger. "You're just making excuses because you're selfish. Your sister is starting a family. She needs our help. She needs your help." "Then you co-sign," I said to my mother. "Or Dad. You both have better credit than me anyway." My father rustled his newspaper, not meeting my eyes. "Our credit is tied up in the business. You know that." Of course I knew that. In my previous life, I'd known that too, and I'd signed anyway because family came first, because Victoria was the golden child and I was the workhorse, because that's how it had always been. But not this time. "I'm sorry," I said, and I wasn't sorry at all. "I can't help you with this." I walked out of the kitchen while they shouted after me, their voices blending into a familiar symphony of guilt and manipulation. I climbed the stairs to my childhood bedroom, the small one in the back of the house that barely fit a twin bed and a dresser, and closed the door. My hands were shaking, but it was the good kind of shaking, the kind that came from finally standing up for yourself after a lifetime of being crushed underfoot. I needed to remember everything. I pulled out my laptop and started typing, documenting every detail I could recall about my previous life. The timeline, the dates, the medical reports, the environmental studies that had finally exposed the truth too late to save me. I'd been born the second daughter to parents who desperately wanted a son. When I arrived 2 years after Victoria, my mother had actually cried in the delivery room, and not from joy. That story had been told at every family gathering, always with a laugh as if it were charming instead of devastating. Victoria had been beautiful from birth, blonde, blue-eyed, easy. I'd been colicky, plain, difficult. Victoria had been naturally thin. I'd struggled with my weight. Victoria had been popular. I'd been bullied. Victoria had married a successful doctor. I'd had a string of failed relationships with men who'd sensed my desperation for love and exploited it. But the real divergence had come when I was 18. I'd been accepted to a good university 3 hours away, a chance to escape, to become my own person. My parents had sat me down and explained that they couldn't afford to send both of us to college. Victoria needed to go to state, the expensive state university with the good sorority system where she could meet the right kind of people. I could go to community college locally and live at home. It's only fair, my mother had said. Victoria has more potential. You understand, don't you, sweetie? I'd understood. I'd always understood. I was the backup child, the spare, the one who existed to make Victoria's life easier. So, I'd gone to community college while working full-time at a grocery store. I'd transferred to a state school after 2 years, taking out loans because by then, Victoria needed help with her apartment deposit, her car payment, her sorority dues. Family helped family, after all. I'd graduated with $30,000 in student debt. Victoria had graduated debt-free and married within a year. At her wedding, I'd been asked to wear a brown bridesmaid dress while the other bridesmaids wore lavender. "It's better for your complexion," Victoria had said sweetly. The photos had made me look like a troll among princesses. I'd been fired from my first real job out of college when I'd had to take time off to help my mother through a surgery scheduled during my 90-day probation period. When I'd asked Victoria to help instead, she'd been too busy planning her honeymoon. Every family emergency had fallen on me, every financial crisis, every inconvenience. And then had come the house. Victoria and her husband Marcus had been living in a nice apartment, but once she'd gotten pregnant, suddenly they'd needed a house. Not wanted, needed. For the baby. For the future. The house on Maple Grove Avenue had been perfect, but it had been just slightly outside their budget. The bank had required a co-signer with better credit history. I'd been the only option. My parents had already co-signed for their business expansion. Marcus's parents had refused. So it had fallen to me. I'd signed. Of course I'd signed. The guilt, the obligation, the desperate hope that maybe this time, if I helped enough, I'd finally be part of the family instead of its servant. Victoria and Marcus had moved in. I'd been invited for dinner exactly twice in 6 months. Both times, Victoria had asked me to babysit while they went out, turning what was supposed to be a family meal into unpaid labor. Then Victoria had started complaining. The house felt wrong. The water tasted funny. She was having headaches. Marcus agreed they should sell and find something better. After all, they could afford more now that he'd made partner at his practice. They'd moved to a beautiful colonial in the suburbs. They'd kept the Maple Grove house as a rental property. "For investment," Marcus had said. "The market's good." They'd found tenants immediately. What they hadn't done was continue making mortgage payments. "You're the co-signer," Victoria had explained when I'd confronted her. "Your credit's taking the hit anyway. We need our cash for the new house." I'd been evicted from my apartment when my landlord had discovered my credit score had tanked. I'd had nowhere to go but the Maple Grove house. Victoria had been kind enough to let me live there rent-free, though I'd still been responsible for the full mortgage payment, plus utilities, plus maintenance. "At least you're not homeless," my mother had said. I'd lived there for 3 years. 3 years of scraping by, working tutus, watching my health deteriorate. The fatigue had started first. Then the joint pain. Then the cognitive issues, forgetfulness, confusion. I'd thought I was just stressed, just depressed, just weak. By the time I'd been diagnosed, I'd been dying. The environmental reports had come out 2 months before my death. The Maple Grove property had been built on the site of an old battery factory. The soil was saturated with heavy metals. The groundwater was contaminated. The previous owner had known. That's why the house had been priced so attractively. They'd disclosed it in paperwork that Victoria and Marcus had never read. I'd tried to sue. My lawyer had explained that I'd signed the mortgage documents, which had included an acknowledgement that I'd reviewed the property disclosures. The fact that I'd never actually been shown those disclosures didn't matter. Victoria and Marcus had claimed they'd had no idea. They'd moved out because of Victoria's intuition, not because of any knowledge of contamination. They'd sold the house at a loss to a developer who'd planned to demolish it and remediate the land. I'd been left with nothing. Medical debt, student debt, mortgage debt, and organs that were shutting down one by one. I'd died alone on a Tuesday. Victoria had texted me the next day asking if I could watch the baby on Saturday. But somehow, impossibly, I'd woken up again. Same body, same life, but back at age 25, 6 months before that fateful dinner where I'd signed away my life. I'd spent the first week in a daze, convinced I was hallucinating. But the dates were right. The details were right. I was really here, really alive, really being given a second chance. I'd thought about warning them, about being the bigger person, about saving Victoria from her own ignorance. Then I'd overheard a conversation between my mother and Victoria. I'd been home early from work, walking past my mother's craft room when I'd heard my name. "Do you really think she'll sign?" Victoria had asked. "Of course she will." My mother's voice had been utterly confident. "She always does. She's desperate for us to love her. It's actually kind of pathetic." Victoria had laughed. "God, I know. Marcus feels bad about it, but I told him she'll be fine. She's used to struggle. It's her natural state." "Exactly, and really we're doing her a favor. At least she'll have a place to live when she inevitably loses her apartment. You know how irresponsible she is with money." I'd been irresponsible with money because every time I'd saved anything, they'd had an emergency that required my help. But they'd rewritten that narrative too. That conversation had crystallized something in me. These people didn't love me. They never had. I was a tool to them, a resource to be exploited. I'd grieved then, properly grieved for the family I'd never have and the love that had never existed. And then I'd gotten angry. The decision to fight back had come gradually, then all at once. I'd been researching the Maple Grove property, pulling up all the historical records I could find. The battery factory had operated there from 1952 to 1987. It had been a Superfund site candidate that had somehow slipped through the cracks due to local political pressure and paperwork errors. The land had been sold to a development company owned by a cousin of the former mayor. That company had done minimal remediation, just enough to pass a cursory inspection, and then built cheap houses on the contaminated soil. The house Victoria wanted was one of 4 on that lot. In my previous life, residents of the other 3 houses had eventually developed cancers and neurological conditions at rates that had finally triggered a proper environmental investigation. By then, I'd already been dead. I'd died because I'd signed those papers. But this time, I knew the truth. This time, I had foreknowledge. This time, I could protect myself. But more than that, and I wasn't proud of the dark satisfaction this brought me, this time I could let Victoria reap what she'd tried to sow. The plan had formed in stages. First, I'd absolutely refuse to co-sign. That was non-negotiable. My credit, my life, my responsibility to myself. Second, I'd document everything. Every request for money, every guilt trip, every manipulation. I'd started carrying my phone everywhere, recording conversations. In my state, one-party consent was legal for recordings. Third, and this was the part that made my hands shake with something between fear and excitement, I'd make sure Victoria got that house anyway. Because in my previous life, she'd moved out before the worst effects had hit. She'd been fine while I'd been the one who'd died. But what if she'd actually had to live there? What if she couldn't just rent it out and walk away? I wasn't trying to kill her. I wasn't a murderer. But I knew from my research that the health effects could be reversed if caught early, if exposure was limited to a year or 2. What I wanted was for Victoria to experience what I'd experienced, The fear, the medical bills, the slow realization that her perfect life was built on poison. I wanted her to understand what she'd tried to do to me, even if she'd been too self-absorbed to realize it. Fourth, I'd build a new life for myself. I'd use my foreknowledge to make better choices, to invest wisely, to protect myself. I'd had 3 years of dying slowly. Now I'd have those years back, healthy and whole. The revenge wouldn't be quick. It would be slow, strategic, and absolutely devastating. And it would start with that dinner conversation. 3 weeks after I'd walked out of that dinner, Victoria called me. I didn't answer. She called again and again. My mother started texting, "Why are you doing this to your sister? She's pregnant. The stress isn't good for the baby." I didn't respond. My father sent an email. "You're being childish. Family helps family." I archived it. On the 4th week, Victoria showed up at my apartment. I'd been expecting this. In my previous life, she'd done the same thing, except I'd caved immediately and signed the papers she'd brought with her. This time, I looked through the peephole and didn't open the door. "I know you're in there," Victoria shouted. "Your car's here. Open up." I sat on my couch and turned up the TV. She pounded on the door for 10 more minutes, then left. I watched from my window as she sat in her BMW, a car I'd helped her make payments on 2 years ago, and cried into her phone. Good, let her cry. The next phase came from an unexpected source. Marcus. He called me from his office. "Hey, it's Marcus. Can we talk?" I almost hung up, but curiosity won. "About what?" "About the house situation." "Look, I know there's family drama and I try to stay out of it, but Victoria's really upset. She's pregnant and she needs stability. This house means everything to her." "Then you co-sign," I said. "My parents won't let me. They're weird about mixing family and money." The irony was apparently lost on him. "But I've been thinking, what if we made it worth your while?" This was new. In my previous life, he'd never offered anything. "What do you mean?" "What if we paid you? Like a fee for co-signing. Say $2,000? $2,000 to take on a mortgage of $350,000 on a house built on poison." "No, thank you." $5,000? "Marcus, I'm not interested in any amount of money. The answer is no." $10,000. His voice had an edge now, Dibes. "Come on, be reasonable. That's a lot of money for just signing your name." "If it's just signing my name, then why do you need me to do it?" Silence, then awe. "You're really going to do this? You're going to ruin your sister's happiness over what? Stubbornness?" "I'm not ruining anything. She can buy a different house. One you can actually afford without a cosigner. This is the house she wants. The house our baby deserves. Then I guess you'll have to work harder to afford it on your own." I hung up. My hands were shaking again, but with adrenaline now. In my previous life, I would have taken the 10,000. I would have thought it was a fortune. I would have signed. The 10,000 would have been gone within months, eaten up by the family emergencies that always seem to arise. And I'd still have died, not this time. 6 weeks after the initial dinner, my mother called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking. "Finally," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've put this family through?" "Hi, Mom." "Don't hi, Mom me." Victoria is beside herself. She's having anxiety attacks. The doctor says the stress could harm the baby. Is that what you want? To hurt your unborn niece or nephew? The manipulation was so transparent, it was almost funny. "Mom, Victoria's anxiety isn't my responsibility. She's your sister. And I'm a person, not a bank." "You selfish, ungrateful—" She caught herself, switched tactics. "Honey, please, think about what you're doing. Think about the family. We've always been there for you." "Have you?" The question came out quieter than I'd intended. "When have you been there for me, Mom, specifically?" "We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, gave you a home." "That's the legal minimum for having a child." "What else?" Another pause. "I don't like your tone. I don't like being used." "You know what?" Her voice went cold. Fine, don't sign, but don't come crying to us when you need help. Don't expect us to be there for you anymore. You're making a choice here. Something in my chest eased. Finally, the truth laid bare. Okay. Okay? That's all you have to say? Mom, you've never been there for me. You're not offering to remove something I've ever had. You're just finally being honest about it. She hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring at my phone, waiting to feel sad or regretful. I didn't. I felt free. 2 months after the initial dinner, Victoria and Marcus found another co-signer, Marcus's younger brother, Tyler. Tyler was 23, fresh out of college, eager to help his big brother. I learned this from Victoria's Facebook post. Finally moving into our dream home. So grateful for family who actually show up for each other. Hashtag blessed, hashtag new house, hashtag baby on the way. The dig was obvious. I didn't care. I left a laughing emoji reaction and then blocked her. What I did care about was making sure my own life was on track. I'd started therapy, something I'd never been able to afford in my previous life. I'd started investing the money I wasn't lending to my family. I'd gotten a better job at a tech company, using knowledge from my previous life about which companies would boom. I'd also started working out, eating better, taking care of myself. Without the constant stress of family drama, I'd lost weight, my skin had cleared up, and I'd started sleeping through the night for the first time in years. I'd gone on dates. I'd made actual friends, people who valued me for myself, not for what I could give them. I'd started living. Meanwhile, I'd watched Victoria's social media from a burner account. The posts about the house had been ecstatic at first, the nursery photos, the backyard barbecues, the perfect suburban life. Then, around month 6, the tone shifted. Anyone else's water taste weird sometimes? Must be the pipes in these new builds, lol. Pregnancy brain is so real. I keep forgetting things and I'm only 6 months along. Why am I so tired all the time? This baby is draining me. I'd had those same symptoms. But Victoria was pregnant, so everyone told her it was normal. It probably was normal at this stage. The real damage would take time. I didn't feel guilty. I told myself I didn't feel guilty. She tried to trap me in that house. The fact that she'd trapped herself instead was poetic justice. 1 year after the initial dinner, I got a call from Tyler, Marcus's brother. "You were right," he said without preamble, "about the house." My stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "The land, the contamination. It came out in the news last week. There's a whole investigation. The other houses on the street are part of it too. People are getting sick." "And Victoria?" "She's freaking out. The baby, her son, Oliver, he's 6 months old now. She's terrified he's been exposed. They're running tests." I closed my eyes. "Is he okay?" "So far, they caught it early. They're moving out this week. Marcus's parents are letting them stay in their guest house." "And the mortgage?" Tyler laughed bitterly. "I'm fucked. My credit's destroyed. They stopped making payments as soon as the news broke. The house is worthless now. Can't sell it. Can't rent it. I'm stuck with a $350,000 debt on a toxic property." This was what would have happened to me. Exactly this. "I'm sorry," I said, and part of me meant it. Tyler had been collateral damage in my family's dysfunction. "Marcus told me you refused to co-sign. He said you were just being difficult, but you knew, didn't you? You knew about the contamination." "I suspected," I said carefully. "I did research. The information was public record if anyone had bothered to look. I was 23. I trusted my brother." His voice cracked. "I'm filing for bankruptcy. My life is over before it started." "Tyler, I'm sorry, but you can recover from this. Bankruptcy isn't the end. You're young. You have time." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one drowning." He hung up. I sat there feeling the complicated swirl of emotions. I hadn't meant for Tyler to suffer, but I also hadn't chosen him as the co-signer. Marcus and Victoria had. Still, I sent him an anonymous tip about a good bankruptcy attorney. It was the least I could do. The real fallout came 3 months later. Victoria called me from a number I didn't recognize. I answered out of morbid curiosity. You knew. Her voice was raw. You fucking knew about the contamination and you didn't warn me. I tried to tell you at dinner, I said calmly. You called me jealous and ignored me. You should have tried harder. You should have. My son could have been hurt. Do you understand that? My baby. Is Oliver okay? Despite everything, I needed to know. He's fine. No elevated heavy metals. We got lucky, but we could have lost him. I'm glad he's okay. That's all you have to say? She was crying now. I'm your sister. You should have protected me. The audacity was stunning. Victoria, I tried to protect you. You refused to listen. You called me selfish and jealous. You chose to buy that house. Because I didn't know. You didn't know because you didn't do your research. The information was publicly available. I found it with a simple Google search. I was pregnant. I was stressed. I didn't have time to. You had time to make me responsible for your mortgage, I cut in. You had time to try to trap me into co-signing. You had time to guilt me and manipulate me and use me like you've used me my entire life. Silence. Then, that's not fair. Fair? You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you about fair, Victoria. Fair would have been you and mom and dad treating me like I mattered. Fair would have been splitting college costs equally. Fair would have been not making me the ugly bridesmaid in your wedding. Fair would have been visiting me when I needed help, instead of always demanding that I help you. I can't believe you're bringing up old stuff when my family is in crisis. Your family is in crisis because of your own choices, not mine. Mom was right about you, Victoria spat. You are selfish. You always have been. You're just bitter that I have a better life than you. Actually, Victoria, I don't think you do anymore. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I felt lighter than I had in years, maybe ever. The revenge I'd imagined, slow, strategic, devastating, was unfolding perfectly. But it wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about boundaries, about self-respect, about refusing to be a victim. I'd documented everything, the recordings of their manipulation, the texts, the emails. I'd compiled them into a folder I called evidence, though I wasn't sure what I'd do with it. I'd also made peace with the fact that my family would never understand what they'd done. They were too absorbed in their own narrative where I was the problem, the difficult one, the selfish daughter and sister. That was okay. I didn't need their understanding. I didn't need their approval. What I needed was to build a life where I mattered, where I was valued, where I was safe. And I was doing that. I'd gotten another promotion at work. I'd invested my savings wisely, using my foreknowledge of market trends to build a substantial portfolio. I'd started dating someone kind, a software engineer named David, who thought I was brilliant and beautiful and never asked me for money. I'd moved to a new apartment in a safe neighborhood. I'd adopted a cat named Phoenix because I too had risen from the ashes. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and it was good. 18 months after the initial dinner, the full extent of the Maple Grove contamination became a major news story. A class action lawsuit was filed against the development company, the city, and everyone involved in covering up the toxic site. Tyler was part of the lawsuit. So were the other residents who'd gotten sick. Victoria and Marcus tried to join, claiming emotional distress and testing expenses for Oliver. Their claim was rejected because they'd moved out too quickly to have suffered significant exposure. The house sat empty, worthless. Tyler's bankruptcy had gone through, but the mortgage company was now suing Marcus and Victoria for the remaining balance, claiming they'd fraudulently misrepresented their income on the application. I watched it all unfold from a safe distance, like a Greek tragedy, where I'd narrowly avoided being crushed in the final act. My mother called once, from her own number this time. I let it go to voicemail. Hi, honey, it's Mom. I know we haven't talked in a while, and things have been complicated. But I was hoping we could get together for coffee. I'd like to explain some things. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Call me back? I deleted the voicemail. There had been no misunderstanding. I'd simply finally understood the truth. 2 years after the initial dinner, my father had a stroke. I found out from a cousin on Facebook. Not from my mother or Victoria. From a cousin I barely knew who posted, "Prayers for Uncle Dan, who's in the hospital after a stroke." I stared at the post for a long time. Part of me, the trained, conditioned part, felt guilty. Felt like I should call, should visit, should help. But the stronger part, the part that had died and been reborn, remembered being alone in the hospital. Remembered calling my family when I'd first gotten my diagnosis, when I'd been terrified and needed support. Remembered my mother saying she couldn't visit because she was helping Victoria with the baby. Remembered my father not calling back at all. I sent a card, a generic get well soon card with no personal message, no return address. It felt appropriate. The climax of my revenge, though I'd stopped thinking of it as revenge and started thinking of it as natural consequences, came 2.5 years after that fateful dinner. Victoria showed up at my apartment building. Security called up to ask if I wanted them to let her in. "No," I said. "She says it's an emergency." I sighed. "What kind of emergency?" "She didn't specify. She's crying pretty hard, though." I thought about it. I thought about the girl I'd been, who would have rushed down immediately. I thought about the woman I'd become, who understood that her compassion had limits and those limits were healthy. "Tell her I'm not available." "Will do." I watched from my window as Victoria got back in her car, not the BMW anymore, but a beat-up Honda, and sat there crying. I felt something. Not satisfaction exactly, not pity either, just distance. Like watching a stranger's drama unfold. She sat there for an hour, then she left. I didn't call her. I didn't call my mother to find out what the emergency was. I made myself dinner, fed Phoenix, and watched a movie with David, who'd moved in 3 months ago and split the rent exactly 50-50. The next day, my cousin posted an update. "Victoria and Marcus are getting divorced. So sad when families fall apart." I read it without emotion. Then I closed Facebook and went to work. 3 years after the initial dinner, I got a letter. It came to my office, which meant someone had gone to significant effort to find my current workplace. The return address was a law firm. My hands shook as I opened it, wondering if somehow I was being sued, if the mortgage company had found a way to come after me. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was an offer. The contaminated Maple Grove property was being purchased by a remediation company as part of the settlement. They were buying out all the mortgages, including Tyler's. As the person who'd been asked to co-sign but had refused, I was being offered a finder's fee for my due diligence research that had been referenced in depositions. The amount, $50,000. I read the letter 3 times. It was legitimate. The research I'd done, the warnings I'd given that had been documented in Tyler's testimony, had been considered part of the evidence that the contamination was knowable to a reasonably diligent buyer. I'd saved myself. And inadvertently, my research had helped Tyler's case. I signed the paperwork. The check arrived 2 weeks later. I donated half to an environmental justice organization. I invested the other half. I didn't tell my family about the money. They'd find a way to claim they deserved it. 4 years after the initial dinner, I got engaged to David. I posted about it on social media. A beautiful photo of the ring, the proposal story, our plans for a small wedding. My mother commented within minutes. "Congratulations, honey. So happy for you. Can we talk soon? I'd love to help with planning." I deleted the comment and didn't respond. Victoria sent a DM. "I'm happy you found someone. I hope you'll invite family to the wedding. Despite everything, we're still sisters." I blocked her. My father sent an email. "Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you'll consider including your family in this important day. Life is short and family is important." I archived it without responding. We had a small wedding, 30 people, all friends, and David's family. His mother treated me with more warmth and respect in one afternoon than my own mother had in 29 years. I didn't miss my family at the wedding. I didn't think about them at all. I was too busy being happy. 5 years after the initial dinner, I got a call from a hospice. My father had had another stroke. He was dying. He was asking for me. Drove to the hospice, not because I'd forgiven him, but because I needed to see it through. I needed to close this chapter completely. He looked small in the hospital bed, old, fragile. "You came," he said, his speech slurred from the stroke. "I did. Your mother, she wants to talk to you." "I'm not here for her. I'm here because you asked for me." He nodded slowly. "I was a bad father." The admission surprised me. "Yes. I'm sorry." "Okay. I let your mother, I let her treat you differently. I saw it. I never stopped it." "No, you didn't." "Can you forgive me?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But not today." He closed his eyes. "That's fair." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "Why did you treat me like I didn't matter?" "You reminded me of myself," he said quietly. "Plain, ordinary. I saw all my own failures in you. Victoria was like your mother, beautiful, special. It was easier to love her." The honesty was brutal, but I appreciated it more than any apology. "Thank you for telling me the truth," I said. "Your sister, she's struggling. The divorce, the house, everything. She has nothing now." "That's unfortunate. She's asking for money, for help. Your mother gave her everything, but it's not enough. That's not my problem. She's your sister. She's a stranger who happens to share my DNA," I said. She made her choices. I made mine." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're stronger than I ever was." "I had to be. You didn't give me a choice." "I left before my mother arrived. I didn't go to his funeral when he died 3 days later." David asked if I was okay. I was. 6 years after the initial dinner, I had my first child, a daughter. We named her Aurora because she was our new beginning, our light. I held her in my arms and made a promise. I would never make her feel less than. I would never compare her to a sibling. I would never use her for my own gain. She would know she was loved, unconditionally, just for existing. My mother sent a card. "Congratulations on the baby. I'd love to meet my granddaughter. Perhaps we could start fresh?" I sent it back unopened, marked "Return to Sender." Victoria sent a message through a mutual acquaintance. "I heard you had a baby. I have a son. They're cousins. Don't you think they should know each other?" I blocked the acquaintance. My family of origin was gone. I'd chosen to amputate that limb to save my life. And my life was beautiful. 8 years after the initial dinner, I was at a coffee shop when I saw Victoria. She looked old, tired. She was wearing scrubs. She'd become a medical assistant, according to the Facebook profile I'd checked once out of morbid curiosity. She saw me. Our eyes met. I waited for the surge of emotion. Anger, grief, satisfaction, something. I felt nothing. She approached my table hesitantly. "Hi." "Hi. You look good, happy." "I am." "I heard you have a daughter and another baby on the way?" "Yes. I was 4 months pregnant with our second child." "I'm happy for you." She said it like she meant it. "Really?" "Thank you." "I wanted to apologize," she said. "For everything. I was selfish. I was cruel. I used you. I know that now." "Okay." "I'm in therapy, working on myself, trying to be better for Oliver." "That's good." "I know I can't undo what I did. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to know I understand now. What I put you through. What our whole family put you through. I looked at her, really looked at her, saw the regret, the exhaustion, the genuine remorse. I appreciate you saying that, I said finally. I hope you continue to work on yourself. I hope you're a good mother to Oliver. Do you think... She swallowed hard. I'll see. Do you think someday we could try again? As sisters? I thought about the girl I'd been, the one who would have seized this moment, who would have been so grateful for this crumb of acknowledgement. I thought about the woman I'd become, the one who knew her worth. No, I said gently, I don't think so. Too much has happened. I've built a new life, and it doesn't have room for the old one. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I needed to try. I know, and I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. I don't forgive you because you apologized. I forgave you years ago for my own sake, so I could move on. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. It just means I'm not carrying the weight of what you did anymore. That's more than I deserve, she whispered. Probably, I agreed. Take care of yourself, Victoria. I left the coffee shop without looking back. 10 years after the initial dinner, I stood in the backyard of my beautiful home, a home David and I had saved for and bought together, a home with clean water and safe soil and a mortgage we could actually afford. Aurora was 8 now, bright and confident and kind. Our son, Felix, was 6, curious and gentle. I was watching them play in their swing set, shrieking with laughter. David came out and wrapped his arms around me from behind. What are you thinking about? How different my life could have been. Different how? I thought about that dinner table, that mortgage document, that signature I'd almost made. I could have signed, I said. I could have helped them. I could have been the person they wanted me to be. And I'd be dead, or broken, or still trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it. He kissed my temple. But you didn't sign. No, I didn't. Best decision you ever made? I watched my children play healthy and whole and happy. I thought about my thriving career, my beautiful home, my loving husband. I thought about the therapy I'd completed, the boundaries I'd learned to set, the self-worth I'd built from nothing. I thought about Victoria's apology in the coffee shop and how I'd been able to hear it without needing it. I thought about my father's deathbed confession and how I'd been able to accept it without forgiving. I thought about my mother's continued attempts to contact me and how I'd been able to ignore them without guilt. Yes, I said. The best decision I ever made was choosing myself. The house on Maple Grove Avenue had been demolished years ago. The land was still being remediated. The lawsuit had bankrupted the development company. Tyler had recovered and was now a financial advisor, using his experience to help young people avoid predatory co-signing situations. Victoria was apparently doing better, working steadily, raising Oliver, trying to be a better person. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd started a support group for people who'd been financial abusers, taking accountability for her past. Good for her. I hoped she succeeded. But that wasn't my story anymore. My story was here in this backyard with this family I'd chosen and built and nurtured with intention and love. My story was about survival and rebirth and the radical act of putting myself first. My family had tried to trap me in a house built on poison. Instead, I'd escaped and built my own house on solid ground. And I'd never been happier. Aurora ran over, breathless and grinning. Mama, Felix said he can swing higher than me. Tell him I can swing higher. I laughed and scooped her up. How about you both just swing safely and have fun? She considered this. Okay, but I'm still better at it. David laughed. She's definitely your daughter. And proud of it, I said. As I set Aurora down and watched her race back to the swings, I thought one last time about that dinner, that document, that choice. I'd been reborn with foreknowledge and a chance to rewrite my fate. I'd use that chance not for elaborate revenge, but for something simpler and more profound. I'd chosen to live. And in choosing to live, truly live, on my own terms, I'd won. The house on contaminated land had crumbled, but I had built an empire on self respect, and that empire would stand forever.